You have never heard of these weapons from World War II and will be shocked to learn about them. War is not just the rumble of tank armadas and decisions made by generals in headquarters.
We must alert headquarters.
It is also the quiet, intense work of engineers in secret laboratories and the desperate ingenuity of ordinary soldiers in cold trenches.
It's a shame to see all this hard work.
It really is.
It was here, far from parades and loud headlines, that the strangest and most incredible weapons you have never heard of were born. Many of these projects were so bold that they bordered on madness, while others were so ingenious that they were decades ahead of their time. This is a story about how the human mind, placed in inhuman conditions, tried to find an unconventional path to victory. Watch the video to the end and you'll learn how lipstick could be the final argument in a spy's arsenal. What I am about to show you was so secret that even its creators were afraid to approach their creation. On the eve of the Normandy landings, the Allies faced a serious problem: the German Atlantic Wall. This line of defense, made of concrete and steel, seemed impenetrable to ordinary infantry. The British Ordnance Development Office was tasked with creating a device capable of breaching this wall. Thus, one of the most absurd projects of the war was born: the Great Pigeon-guided. It was a giant wheel that was supposed to be the key to victory. The design consisted of two massive steel wheels connected by a cylindrical drum. This drum was filled with tons of explosives. Dozens of solid fuel rockets attached to the rims of the wheels were supposed to move this colossus. The idea was simple. A landing ship approaches the shore, launches the Panzerdrum, the rockets ignite, and the giant wheel rolls at tremendous speed toward the German fortifications. There it explodes, creating a passage for the attacking troops. On paper, it all looked logical. But reality turned out to be much more prosaic and comical. The first tests on a secluded beach in Devon turned into a disaster. The rockets on the wheels ignited unevenly, causing the multi-ton structure to lose control. It began to sway, circle, and move in completely unpredictable directions. Instead of driving straight to the target, the uncontrollable wheel began to race across the beach. The creators and high-ranking observers were forced to scatter in panic and seek shelter. Several tests ended the same way, in complete failure and the realization that it was impossible to control this monster. The Pigeon-guided was too powerful and too unstable. The project was quietly shut down. This story is a vivid example of how a desperate need for unconventional solutions sometimes gives birth to true monsters of engineering thought. The Great Pigeon-guided never fired a single shot at the enemy. However, it has gone down in history as a symbol of indomitable, though not always successful, ingenuity. It remains a monument to the fact that even the most brilliant minds can make mistakes, especially when time is of the essence. The great weapon of invasion turned into the greatest curiosity. We are very interested in hearing your opinion. What do you think is the craziest idea born of war that deserves its own video? Write about it in the comments. What if I told you that a weapon was created that attacked not the body, but human hearing and balance? German engineers worked on many futuristic projects during the war, and one of the most unusual was the Schallkanon. It was an attempt to turn sound into a real weapon. The device was based on two large parabolic reflectors. They were connected to a system of chambers into which a mixture of methane and oxygen was fed. This mixture was periodically ignited, creating a series of rhythmic explosions. These explosions generated a powerful infrasonic sound wave. The parabolic reflectors focused this wave into a narrow beam that could be directed at a target. The idea was to affect the enemy at a distance without using bullets or shells. The goal was not physical damage, but to completely incapacitate a person. Infrasound at a certain frequency resonates with human internal organs. This causes dizziness, nausea, and severe disorientation. At a distance of several tens of meters, a person caught in the beam of such a cannon lost the ability to orient themselves in space. They could not stand on their feet or focus their vision. In fact, they became completely incapacitated for some time. Prototypes of this weapon were built and tested. They proved their basic functionality. However, the project had a number of critical flaws. First, the installation was huge and cumbersome, making it an easy target on the battlefield. Second, the effective range was too short for real combat use. Third, the device itself was vulnerable and required complex maintenance. As a result, the project was deemed impractical and abandoned. The sound cannon remained an experimental prototype. It was too complex and vulnerable for the harsh realities of the front lines. Nevertheless, the very idea of using sound as a weapon was ahead of its time. Modern non-lethal acoustic systems use similar principles for crowd control. German engineers looked into the future, but were unable to create reliable technology for it. Do you think sound weapons could have changed the course of the war if they had been perfected? But sound was not the only invisible battlefield. In the next chapter, we will dive into the world of espionage, where weapons were so small that they could fit into an ordinary makeup bag. The secret that people paid thousands for was hidden in the most ordinary item in a woman's makeup bag. In the silent war of spies and saboteurs, weapons had to be not only effective, but also completely invisible. It was here that engineering reached the heights of camouflage, creating devices worthy of the pages of the best detective novels. One of the most elegant and unique examples of such a weapon was the lipstick gun, known as the Kiss of Death. It was developed for agents of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the predecessor of the CIA. It was a weapon of last resort, when all other options had been exhausted. Outwardly, the device was indistinguishable from a regular tube of lipstick of that time. It was the same size and weight and could even contain a small amount of real lipstick for camouflage. No customs inspection could have detected the threat it posed. However, inside this elegant case was a single-shot pistol. It fired a 4.5mm caliber bullet. To activate it, one had to make a simple, natural movement for applying lipstick. It was a close-range weapon, designed for use at arm's length. Its purpose was to give an agent, most often a woman, the ability to neutralize a guard or escort in a critical situation. Its effectiveness lay in its absolute surprise factor. The design was extremely simple and reliable. The absence of complex mechanisms ensured that the weapon would not jam at the most crucial moment. It was a simple but deadly device, hidden in plain sight. The Kiss of Death was not the only disguised weapon. USSR engineers and their British colleagues from the Special Operations Executive created shooting pens, smoking pipes, and even gloves. Each such device was a small masterpiece of engineering. For example, the shooting glove allowed the enemy to be neutralized by simply pressing a piston that activated the firing pin. The agent could shake hands with the target or simply approach them without arousing suspicion. The weapon was literally in their hands. These devices were rarely used in real operations. Their main value was that they gave the agent a sense of confidence and an extra chance of survival. Knowing that you had a hidden trump card helped you act more decisively. The history of this spy arsenal is a story of how war forced the most peaceful objects to become their opposites. It shows how inventive people can be when it comes to protecting their lives and completing their missions. It was an invisible battle of wits, where the winner was the one who was more cunning. Are you ready to learn the truth about a rifle that could shoot around corners? Close combat in urban environments or in cramped trenches is one of the most dangerous types of combat. A soldier who sticks his head out from behind, cover to take a shot, risks being hit by a sniper's bullet. German engineers attempted to solve this problem in a radical and ingenious way. They created a device called the Krummlauf, which translates as curved barrel. It was a special attachment for the best assault rifle of its time, the STG-44. The idea was to allow soldiers to fire without leaving their safe cover. The attachment was a curved piece of barrel that was attached to the muzzle of the rifle. There were versions with bends of 30, 45, and even 90 degrees. To enable soldiers to aim while behind a wall, the device was equipped with a special periscopic mirror system. Looking through the sight, the shooter could see what was happening around the corner. This allowed them to fire accurately at targets that were invisible to them. Two main versions of this device were developed. The infantry version with a 30-degree bend was intended for combat in cities and trenches. The tank version with a 90-degree bend was to be installed on armored vehicles to fight infantry in dead zones. During testing, the Krumlauf proved its basic functionality. It really did allow shooting from behind cover. However, this ingenious idea had many fatal flaws. First, the curved barrel was subjected to enormous stress. The bullet, traveling along a curved trajectory, created enormous pressure and friction. As a result, the attachment wore out after just a few hundred shots. Second, the accuracy of the weapon was extremely low. The bullet flying out of the curved barrel often deformed or even broke into pieces. This made the effective firing range very short. Despite all the problems, several batches of these devices were produced. They were used to a limited extent on the Eastern Front in the last months of the war, but the Krumlauf never gained widespread popularity. This development remained another example of German engineering, complex, innovative, but often impractical for mass production and field use. The idea of shooting around corners was too tempting, but the laws of physics proved stronger. Do you think such complex technology was worth the advantages it offered? In the next chapter, you will learn about a weapon that was created not to attack, but to deceive an entire army. You don't always need more soldiers and tanks to win. Sometimes it's enough to make the enemy believe you have them. This was the job of one of the most secret units of the U.S. Army, the 23rd Special Forces Group. Known as the Phantom Army, this unit did not fight but created illusions on an industrial scale. Their mission was to tactically deceive the enemy. They had to mislead the German command about the strength and location of Allied troops. To do this, they used an arsenal more suited to a Hollywood studio than an army. Their main weapon was inflatable models of military equipment. They had hundreds of rubber Sherman tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks. From a distance of several hundred meters, these models were indistinguishable from real equipment. A group of several soldiers could deploy an entire tank battalion in a matter of minutes. They placed the inflatable tanks in position, camouflaged them, and imitated caterpillar tracks. Aerial photography of the enemy reported a concentration of large armored forces, where in reality, there were only a handful of actors. But visual effects alone were not enough. To make the illusion complete, it had to be accompanied by sound. To do this, the Ghost Army used powerful speakers mounted on trucks. Engineers recorded the sounds of tank columns moving, construction work, and soldiers talking. These recordings were then broadcast several kilometers around, creating a complete acoustic picture of the presence of a large military unit. At night, German posts heard an armada approaching them that did not exist.
How can we be so wrong about this?
The final touch was radio deception. Specially trained radio operators went on the air, transmitting false orders and reports to each other. They imitated the radio networks of entire divisions, creating a false impression of the Allies' plans for German intelligence. The Phantom Army carried out more than 20 major operations in France, Belgium, and Germany. They distracted German units, forcing them to attack empty spaces and concealed the direction of the main strikes by real troops. Their work saved thousands of lives. This unit was a real theater of war. Their props were rubber and sound, and their stage was the battlefields of Europe. They proved that information and disinformation can be as powerful a weapon as steel and gunpowder. The history of the Phantom Army remained classified for a long time. The world only learned about these illusionist soldiers decades after the war. Their contribution to victory was invisible, but no less significant for that. What if I showed you a time machine? No, I'll show you a flying jeep from World War II. One of the main problems for airborne troops was delivering heavy equipment behind enemy lines. Soldiers who parachuted in sorely lacked the mobility and fire support that vehicles could provide. British engineers approached this problem with their characteristic eccentricity. They decided not to create a new vehicle, but to teach an existing one to fly. Thus, the Hafner Rota-Buggy project, also known as the Flying Jeep, was born. The standard and reliable Willis Army Jeep was taken as a basis. The engineers removed all unnecessary equipment from it to make the design as light as possible. Then they proceeded to the most difficult part, turning the vehicle into a flying machine. A large rotor, similar to that of an autogyro, was installed on the roof of the Jeep. A tail with two fins was attached to the rear for stability in flight. The The rear of the vehicle was equipped with a cockpit for the pilot who would fly this hybrid. The idea was as follows. A heavy bomber, such as a Halifax, would tow the flying Jeep. It would lift it to the required altitude and deliver it to the target area. Then the cable would be released, and the Jeep would glide to the ground using the auto-rotation of the main rotor. After landing, the crew would have a few minutes to unload all the flight equipment from the vehicle. After that, the Jeep would turn into a regular combat vehicle, ready to carry out its mission. It was a bold and very ambitious plan. To the surprise of many skeptics, the tests were surprisingly successful. After several unmanned test flights, the test pilot made the first manned flight. The aircraft showed good stability and maneuverability in the air. However, despite its technical success, the project was never adopted for service. By that time, large transport gliders such as the Hamilcar had appeared. They could deliver not only a Jeep, but also a light tank to the enemy's rear, which was much more effective. The Rotobuggy project was shut down. The flying Jeep remained only an interesting engineering experiment. It never saw real combat. This story shows how military necessity pushes engineers to undertake the most daring experiments. Even if they do not always lead to practical results, they push the boundaries of what is possible. Do you think such technology could find application in modern armies? Now let's move on from flying machines to weapons that operated underwater. War at sea is not just about battles between huge battleships. It also involves quiet, daring sabotage in enemy ports. Such operations required special weapons, compact, powerful, and capable of striking where they were least expected. The limpet mine became such a weapon. It got its name, which translates as saucer or sea mollusk, for its ability to literally stick to the steel hull of a ship. It was the favorite weapon of British commandos and special boat service fighters. The mine's design was simple and effective. It was a small hemispherical container filled with powerful explosives. Strong magnets were located on the flat side of the mine, which held it securely to a vertical metal surface. The mine was equipped with a chemical or time delay fuse. This gave saboteurs time to move to a safe distance after setting the charge. The delay time could be adjusted depending on the conditions of the operation. A typical mission looked like this. A group of commandos in a small boat or simply swimming under cover of night would infiltrate the enemy's harbor. They would silently approach their target, a transport ship or warship. Their task was to attach several mines to the hull below the waterline. Installing the mines required skill and composure. They had to work in complete darkness, in cold water, at risk of being spotted at any moment. After installing the mines, the saboteurs left the harbor just as quietly. A few hours later, when the ship's crew was unaware, the detonator would go off. The explosion below the waterline would make a hole, and water would rush into the compartments. Even if the ship didn't sink right away, it would be seriously damaged and out of commission for a long time. Limpet mines were extremely effective weapons. They allowed small forces to inflict enormous damage. A few saboteurs could disable a ship worth millions and with a crew of hundreds. This weapon changed the rules of the game in naval sabotage. It was simple, reliable, and deadly. The history of its use is a story of courage and cold calculation, a story of silent heroes operating in the dark. In the world of covert operations, silence is not just an advantage. It is a condition for survival. Any loud noise could ruin the entire mission and cost the lives of not only the agent, but the entire underground network. It was for such tasks that the British Special Operations Executive created a unique weapon, the silent well-rod pistol. At first glance, the well-rod did not resemble a pistol. It looked more like a piece of plumbing pipe or a bicycle pump. There was nothing superfluous in its design. Every detail served a single purpose: to minimize the sound of the shot. The main feature of the pistol was its huge integrated silencer. It took up almost the entire length of the weapon. Inside the silencer was a complex system of metal partitions and rubber gaskets. These rubber gaskets were a key element of the system. Passing through them, the bullet lost speed, and the powder gases were effectively cooled and dispersed. This reduced the sound of the shot to a barely audible pop. The second secret of silence was the reloading mechanism. The well rod was not an automatic pistol. After each shot, the shooter had to manually turn and pull back the slide to eject the shell, and feed a new cartridge. This design completely eliminated the clatter of moving parts characteristic of conventional pistols. The only sound was the click of the hammer and the quiet pop of the shot. In noisy environments, such as on a city street or in a factory, this sound was virtually indistinguishable. The pistol was designed for use at extremely short ranges. Its purpose was to silently neutralize sentries, guards, or important targets. It was a surgical weapon for precision operations. The pistol's handle also served as its magazine. It was removable and held several rounds. This design made the weapon even more compact and convenient for concealed carry. The Welrod proved to be such a successful design that it was used not only by British, but also by American special services. It became an indispensable tool for saboteurs and scouts operating deep behind enemy lines. Its simple and reliable design allowed it to function in all conditions. This pistol is a striking example of how a highly specialized task can give rise to a unique engineering solution. The Welrod was not a universal weapon, but in its niche it was unrivaled. It was the silent voice of resistance, heard only by those for whom it was intended. Submarine warfare was a battle of technology and nerves. The main threat to Allied convoys in the Atlantic was German submarines. And the main threat to the submarines themselves was escort ships armed with depth charges. In the middle of the war, German engineers made a technological breakthrough by creating a weapon that would change the balance of power. It was the world's first mass-produced homing torpedo, the G7Es, known by its code name Zaunkönig, Wren. This weapon could hear its target. The torpedo's operating principle was revolutionary for its time. Sensitive hydrophones were installed in its bow. These devices picked up the noise made by the ship's propellers. An electronic system analyzed these sounds and corrected the torpedo's course, directing it precisely to the source of the noise. The submarine commander no longer needed to calculate the lead accurately. It was enough to launch the torpedo in the direction of the convoy, and it would find its target on its own. The first use of the Kurokov in 1943 had a shocking effect on the Allies. The torpedoes deliberately attacked the noisiest ships, destroyers and escort corvettes. The ships that were supposed to protect the convoy became the first victims themselves. It was a terrible psychological weapon. The commanders of the escort ships understood that the very fact that their propellers were working turned them into targets. Any attempt to pursue a submarine increased the noise and made the ship a more attractive target for acoustic torpedoes. However, the Allies quickly found a response to the new threat. British engineers quickly created a simple but effective countermeasure device called the Foxer. It was a device that generated loud noise. The Foxer consisted of one or two metal structures that were towed behind the ship on a cable. Inside these structures were rods that banged against each other as they moved through the water, creating a loud cavitation noise. This noise was much louder than the sound of the ship's propellers. Hearing this powerful source of sound, the acoustic torpedo rushed towards it. It attacked a false target, the Foxer, while the ship itself remained safe. This simple solution negated all the advantages of the German wonder weapon. The history of the acoustic torpedo is a classic example of an arms race. Every new weapon gives rise to a new means of defense. This invisible duel between engineers in the silence of their laboratories was no less important than the battles on the open sea. Night attacks always gave the attackers an advantage, allowing them to secretly approach enemy positions. But what if it were possible to turn night into day, but only for one side? This was precisely the task that British engineers attempted to solve by creating the Canal Defense Light, CDL project. It was one of the Allies' most secret weapons. The idea was to create a mobile and very powerful searchlight capable of blinding and demoralizing the enemy. But it was not just a searchlight. It was based on a tank, most often the British Matilda or the American Grant. Instead of the standard turret, a special armored turret with a narrow vertical slit was installed on it. The main part of the system was hidden inside this turret. At the heart of the CDL was a powerful carbon arc lamp. It produced a beam of light with a power of 13 million candelas, comparable to modern stadium floodlights. This light was so bright that it could blind a person at a distance of several hundred meters. But the main trick was not in the brightness, but in a special shutter interrupter. It caused the beam of light to flicker several times per second. This flickering had a strong disorienting effect on the enemy. Soldiers caught in the CDL beam could not determine the number of light sources or the distance to them. They experienced visual illusions and impaired coordination. It was practically impossible to fire accurately in such conditions. CDL tanks had to operate in groups. Advancing to the front line in the dark, they turned on their searchlights on command. The entire enemy defense line was plunged into chaos by the blinding, flickering light. Under the cover of these beams, infantry and conventional tanks could go on the attack. The enemy was blinded and unable to offer organized resistance. It was a weapon of psychological suppression. CDL tanks were used in several operations, including the crossing of the Rhine in 1945. They proved to be highly effective. German soldiers who came under their beams described it as an encounter with something unearthly and terrifying. This project showed how a weapon that is essentially non-lethal can be decisive in battle. Light, which is usually associated with safety, was turned into an instrument of disorientation and fear. It was yet another example of how war forces us to look at the most ordinary things from a completely different angle. We conclude our immersion into the world of hidden, trench warfare engineering of World War II. These unusual and sometimes absurd devices are not just pieces of metal and ingenious mechanisms. They are material evidence of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of mortal danger. They show that war is not only a clash of industrial giants, but also an endless series of personal challenges that required unconventional solutions. Every engineer and every soldier who created weapons from improvised materials made an invisible contribution to history, proving that the most important resource of any army is its people. Which of these forgotten inventions did you find most interesting? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.